There's nothing quite like watching a perfectly orchestrated military operation go sideways in the most adorable way possible. And when I say adorable, I mean the kind of catastrophic failure that makes you question whether intelligence is actually an evolutionary advantage or just nature's way of setting up elaborate practical jokes. The Hegemony Military Complex on Valdres Station had spent 6 months planning what they called Operation Human Snare. The goal was simple, elegant, and completely foolproof. Capture the human diplomat who had been causing unprecedented chaos throughout their carefully ordered galactic society. Captain Jade Winters had somehow convinced 17 different species to abandon their traditional hostilities and start what she called friendship circles. The horror of it all was keeping military strategists awake at night. The human's psychological manipulation techniques are unprecedented, announced General Crex Thorne, a towering figure whose silver carapace reflected the tactical displays surrounding his command center. She has weaponized emotional bonding to destabilize centuries of established territorial boundaries. Standing beside him, Dr. Vera Ming, the facility's head of xenopsychology, adjusted her spectacles with the nervous precision of someone who had been tasked with explaining the inexplicable. General, our analysis suggests the human isn't deliberately manipulating anyone. She appears to genuinely believe that different species can coexist peacefully. Exactly, Thorne replied, with the grim satisfaction of someone who had just proven his point. The depth of her delusion makes her even more dangerous. Sincere zealots are always the most effective propagandists. The trap they had designed was a masterwork of military engineering and psychological manipulation. Hidden within the abandoned mining facility on Asteroid 7 Alpha, the Hegemony had constructed what appeared to be a research station in distress. Automated distress signals, evidence of recent evacuation, and carefully planted intelligence suggesting valuable diplomatic information would lure Captain Winters into a containment chamber disguised as an emergency shelter. The human's rescue instincts will override her survival protocols, explained Commander Zara Pike, the operation's tactical coordinator. Once she enters the containment area, energy barriers will activate, and will have her secured for intensive psychological evaluation. The plan had one small flaw that nobody had bothered to mention to the general. The abandoned mining facility wasn't quite as abandoned as the intelligence reports suggested. It housed 6 juvenile Kryllian cubs who had been left there by their parents during a routine hunting expedition. Kryllian cubs were basically the galaxy's equivalent of hyperactive toddlers crossed with apex predators. Standing about 1 meter tall, covered in iridescent blue fur that changed colors with their emotions, and possessed of an insatiable curiosity about everything in the universe, they were simultaneously adorable and potentially lethal. Their parents had left them on the asteroid for what amounted to a supervised camping trip, while they conducted hunting exercises in the outer system. The cubs had names, naturally. There was Zip, who moved like lightning, and had apparently never encountered a piece of technology he couldn't accidentally break while trying to understand how it worked. Bounce, whose enthusiasm for everything was matched only by her complete inability to control her own momentum. Glow, whose fur shifted through rainbow patterns when he was excited, which was always. Whisper, the quietest of the group, who communicated primarily through subtle color changes and occasional soft chirps. Storm, who had appointed herself the group's protector despite being roughly the same size as a medium-sized dog. And finally, Peak, whose curiosity was so intense it bordered on the supernatural. The cubs had been watching the Hegemony's preparation activities with the fascination of children, observing adults building an elaborate playground. Military engineers installing energy barrier generators looked like they were setting up fun new toys. Technicians calibrating containment fields appeared to be creating exciting new hiding places. The entire operation was the most interesting thing that had happened on their asteroid since Zip had figured out how to make the mining equipment play musical tones. Primary target approaching the facility perimeter, reported Lieutenant Commander Seth Vale from his position in the orbital observation post. Captain Winters appears to be following predictive behavioral patterns. Indeed, Captain Jade Winters was proceeding exactly as the psychological profiles had suggested. The 40-something human woman moved through the facility's corridors with the careful competence of someone who had spent years responding to emergency situations. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried a standard diplomatic toolkit that contained everything from universal translators to emergency medical supplies. Reading multiple life signs in the lower levels, She reported into her communication device, apparently talking to her ship. Looks like someone might still be trapped down here. What she was actually detecting was 6 Kryllian cubs who had discovered the trap's containment chamber and decided it looked like the perfect place for a group nap. The energy barrier generators made interesting humming sounds. The floor was smooth and comfortable, and the whole setup reminded them of the sleeping nests their parents built during hunting expeditions. Motion sensors indicate the target is proceeding toward the containment zone, Pike reported with satisfaction. All systems are green for capture protocol activation. Dr. Ming consulted her datapad with growing unease. General, I'm detecting some anomalies in Take C, the facility's biosignature readings. There appear to be additional life forms present. Probably just local fauna. Thorne dismissed. The trap will handle anything small enough to be in that facility. He was about to discover just how wrong it was possible to be, while still being technically correct. Captain Winters reached the lower levels and began following the emergency beacon signals that were supposed to lead her directly into the containment trap. What she found instead was 6 furry blue creatures arranged in a perfect circle, inside what was obviously some kind of high-tech enclosure. All of them sound asleep, and glowing softly with contentment. Not as— "Oh," she said aloud, her voice carrying clearly through the facility's communication systems. "You are absolutely precious." This was not the reaction that Hegemony psychological profiles had predicted. "Target has encountered the trap," Pike reported, though her voice carried a note of confusion. "But she's not entering the containment area. She appears to be talking to something." "Hello there, little ones," Winters continued, approaching the containment chamber with the kind of careful movements that suggested extensive experience with easily startled creatures. "Are you supposed to be here? You look a bit young to be exploring abandoned mining facilities by yourselves." Peak opened one large, luminous eye and regarded the human with sleepy curiosity. His fur shifted from peaceful blue to interested purple as he studied this new arrival. "Target is attempting communication with unknown life forms," Vale reported from orbit. "Should we proceed with trap activation?" "Negative," Thorne commanded. "We need to assess the tactical situation before proceeding." The tactical situation was about to become significantly more complex. Peak's color change had awakened the other cubs, who began emerging from their cozy nap with the slow, stretching movements of creatures who had been very comfortable and were mildly annoyed about being disturbed. "Oh my," Winters said softly, taking in the sight of 6 juvenile aliens who were clearly not supposed to be part of anyone's military operation. "You're Kryllian cubs, aren't you? What are you doing all the way out here?" Bounce, who had been using one of the energy barrier generators as a pillow, stood up and stretched with dramatic flair. Her fur rippled through shades of gold and orange as she fully awakened and focused on the humans standing outside their sleeping area. "Someone left you here," Winters realized, her voice taking on the tone of someone who had just identified a problem that needed solving. "Your parents went hunting and left you somewhere safe. Except this place isn't safe anymore because there are people here with military equipment and very questionable intentions." The cubs exchanged glances that spoke of shared understanding. They had been watching the Hegemony's activities for days and had reached their own conclusions about the adults who kept installing interesting but ultimately pointless technology throughout their temporary home. "General," Dr. Ming called out with growing alarm, "the unknown life forms appear to be Kryllian juveniles. If their parents return and find military personnel in the vicinity of their cubs—" I'm aware of the implications," Thorne replied grimly. Kryllian adults were approximately 4 meters tall, possessed natural weapons that could slice through battle armor, and had been known to dismantle entire battle fleets when they perceived threats to their young. "Target is now inside the containment perimeter," Pike reported. "But she's not in the trap. She's sitting outside it, talking to the cubs." Indeed, Captain Winters had settled cross-legged on the floor just beyond the containment chamber's threshold, apparently conducting a conversation with 6 alien juveniles who were responding with color changes, soft chirps, and body language that suggested they were enjoying the interaction immensely. "The energy barrier generators are humming," she was saying, "and that's probably very soothing for sleeping. But they're also designed to keep things trapped inside once they're activated. That's not really appropriate technology for a nursery, don't you think?" Glow's fur shifted through rainbow patterns, as he apparently agreed with her assessment. Storm moved to the front of the group and made a series of soft sounds that carried unmistakable tones of complaint. "I know, right?" Winters replied as if she understood perfectly. Military types never consider the practical implications of their technology. You've probably been wondering why grown adults would build such an elaborate play structure and then never actually play with it. Whisper approached the energy barrier threshold and placed one small paw against the transparent field. Looking at Winters with obvious intelligence. "You want to come out?" Winters observed. "But the field isn't activated yet, so you can just walk through. The question is, why are you staying inside?" The answer came when Zip bounded over to one of the barrier generators and began demonstrating how it could be made to produce different musical tones by manipulating its control interface. The cubs hadn't been trapped by the containment system. They had been playing with it. "They've turned the trap into a musical instrument," Winters said with obvious delight. "You little troublemakers figured out how to make the military equipment into entertainment systems." "Sir," Pike called out, with barely controlled panic. "The target appears to be communicating effectively with the Kryllian cubs, and they seem to like her. This was not covered in any of the operational protocols. They've been left here alone for several days." Winters continued, apparently conducting a full situational assessment while sitting on a mine floor with 6 alien toddlers. "You're probably getting hungry and bored and maybe a little worried about when your parents are coming back." Bounce moved to the barrier threshold and made a sound that needed no translation. It was the universal expression of a young creature asking for help from a trusted adult. "Right," Winters said, standing up with obvious decision. "First things first. Let's get you out of this elaborate military contraption before someone accidentally activates it." She began examining the energy barrier generators with the focused attention of someone who had extensive experience with technology that other people use to complicate simple situations. "Activation sensors here, power coupling there. Control interface conveniently labeled in standard Hegemony script," she muttered. "Honestly, you'd think they wanted someone to figure out how to disable their trap." "General," Dr. Ming said, urgently, "the human is tampering with the containment system. She's supposed to be inside it, not dismantling it," Thorne replied through gritted teeth. "Should we activate the trap remotely?" Pike asked. "With Kryllian cubs inside?" Ming protested. "The diplomatic consequences alone would." "The cubs can walk out at any time," Thorne pointed out. "The barriers aren't active." That's when they learned another interesting fact about Kryllian juvenile psychology. The cubs had no intention of leaving their new friend alone with the confusing adults who had been installing incomprehensible technology in their temporary home. As Captain Winters worked to disable the trap systems, all 6 cubs arranged themselves in a protective circle around her. Storm took point position, her fur shifting to warning colors that suggested she was prepared to defend the helpful human against any potential threats. The others positioned themselves to provide complete coverage against approaches from any direction. "The cubs are exhibiting protective behaviors toward the target," Vale reported from orbit. "They appear to have formed a pack bond with the human." "In the space of 10 minutes?" Thorne demanded. "Kryllian juveniles are capable of rapid social bonding with individuals they perceive as caretakers," Dr. Ming explained. "The humans' behavior patterns match their psychological expectations for adult protection providers." Which meant that any attempt to activate the trap would now be perceived by 6 Kryllian cubs as an attack on their psychological new pack member. And Kryllian cubs, while adorable, were still the offspring of apex predators with territorial instincts and protective reflexes that could turn dangerous very quickly. "There we go," Winters announced as the energy barrier generators powered down with satisfied-sounding chimes. "Much better. Now, let's see about finding you something to eat while we wait for your parents to come home." "Sir," Pike reported with the tone of someone watching a carefully planned operation collapse in real time. "The trap has been completely disabled. The target is now mobile and has apparently adopted 6 Kryllian cubs." "Adopted?" Thorne repeated weakly. "She's opened her emergency rations and is feeding them," Vale confirmed. "The cubs are responding with obvious affection and trust behaviors." General Thorne stared at the tactical displays, showing his meticulously planned trap being converted into an impromptu daycare center by a human who seemed constitutionally incapable of walking into obvious dangers without stopping to help anyone who looked like they needed assistance. "This," he announced to his command staff, "is not how military operations are supposed to work." Dr. Ming consulted her xenopsychology manuals with the desperate hope of finding some explanation for what they were witnessing. General, I believe we may need to reconsider our fundamental assumptions about human behavioral patterns. You think? Thorne replied with the kind of sarcasm that came from watching months of careful planning unravel, because nobody had considered the possibility that their target might prioritize childcare over self-preservation. On the asteroid below, Captain Winters was conducting an impromptu lesson on proper nutrition for growing Kryllian cubs, while her new charges listened with rapt attention and occasionally contributed enthusiastic color displays to show their appreciation. The trap was disabled. The cubs were happy, and somewhere in the outer system, 2 adult Kryllians were about to return home to find their children had made a new friend who came with very interesting military complications. The Hegemony was about to learn that some humans couldn't be trapped because they were too busy helping everyone else escape. The proximity alarm started screaming exactly 17 minutes later, which was precisely when Thorne realized that this particular military operation had crossed the line from embarrassing failure into potential extinction event. 2 massive contacts approaching from the outer system, Lieutenant Commander Vale reported, his voice climbing several octaves as the tactical displays updated with information that made everyone in the command center suddenly very interested in prayer. Kryllian adult signatures. Moving at combat speed. Direct intercept course with the asteroid. How fast is combat speed? Pike asked with the kind of careful control that suggested she was trying very hard not to panic. Fast enough to arrive in approximately 8 minutes, Vale replied. And angry enough to dismantle our entire fleet if they think we're threatening their cubs. Dr. Ming was frantically scrolling through xenobiology databases, searching for any information that might help them avoid becoming the first military unit in history to be destroyed by concerned parents responding to an apparent childcare emergency. Kryllian adults typically reach 4 meters in height, she reported with academic precision that barely concealed her terror. Natural weapons include retractable claws capable of slicing through starship hull, plating, electromagnetic pulse generation that can disable most electronics, and pack hunting instincts that make them extremely effective against organized military formations. In other words, Thorne said grimly, they're designed by evolution to kill things exactly like us. On the asteroid below, Captain Winters was apparently conducting story time. The cubs had arranged themselves in an attentive semicircle, while she used her hands to illustrate what appeared to be an adventure tale involving brave heroes and dramatic rescues. And then, the clever princess realized that the dragon wasn't actually dangerous. Her voice carried clearly through the facility's communication systems. It was just lonely and scared because everyone kept running away instead of asking if it needed help. Glow's fur shifted through appreciative golden patterns, while Bounce made excited chirping sounds that suggested she was enjoying the narrative immensely. Captain Winters, Pike called through the communication array, her voice tight with urgency. We need you to evacuate the facility immediately. The cubs' parents are returning, and the situation is about to become extremely dangerous. Oh good, Winters replied cheerfully, apparently missing the life-threatening implications entirely. The little ones have been worried about when their family would come home. How long until they arrive? Approximately 6 minutes, Vale reported. And they're going to be very upset when they find military personnel in the vicinity of their children. Right, Winters said thoughtfully. That does present a problem, and you might want to consider leaving. The casual way she suggested that an entire military operation should pack up and flee because of approaching alien parents would have been insulting if it weren't such obviously sound, tactical advice. The human appears to be staying with the cubs, Pike observed with something approaching awe. She's not attempting to evacuate. Of course she's not, Thorne muttered. Humans don't abandon children, even when those children happen to be alien apex predators whose parents could turn us all into decorative metalwork. Whisper had approached Winters and was making soft inquiry sounds, while her fur shifted through questioning, blue and purple patterns. Yes, sweetie. The grown-ups are worried about something, Winters confirmed, somehow translating Kryllian color communication into comprehensible concepts. But don't worry. Everything will be fine once your parents see that you're safe and happy. Storm positioned herself between Winters and the facility's entrance, her protective instincts clearly activated by the mention of worried adults and potential danger. The cubs are exhibiting defensive behaviors, Dr. Ming reported. They've identified the human as a pack member requiring protection. 5 minutes to contact, Vale announced. General, we need to make a decision about fleet positioning. Thorne stared at the tactical displays, showing 2 apocalyptic life forms approaching at velocities that suggested they were motivated by parental concern, rather than casual interest. His carefully planned military operation had become an elaborate setup for first contact with species, whose idea of negotiation involved removing obstacles to their children's safety. All ships, maintain defensive positions but do not target the approaching contacts, he commanded. We are about to attempt diplomatic communication with extremely protective parents who have every right to be angry with us. Diplomatic communication? Pike repeated. Sir, our xenolinguistics team hasn't had time to prepare proper translation protocols for Kryllian adult vocalizations. We have a translator, Thorne replied, watching Captain Winters continue her story time while 6 alien children listened with rapt attention. The human appears to understand their communication methods better than our entire research department. On the asteroid, Peake had discovered that the disabled energy barrier generators made excellent climbing structures. He was demonstrating advanced acrobatic techniques while his siblings provided enthusiastic color commentary. Careful there, little explorer, Winters cautioned, moving to spot the adventurous cub as he attempted increasingly complex maneuvers. Those generators aren't really designed for playground equipment. 4 minutes to contact, Vale reported, reading massive energy signatures consistent with Kryllian combat preparation. They know we're here. Captain Winters, Thorne called through the communication array. Can you explain to the cubs that we're not a threat? That this is all a misunderstanding? I could, Winters replied thoughtfully. But that would be lying. You did build an elaborate trap designed to capture me. And you did install it in their temporary home without asking permission. From their perspective, you're definitely a threat. The brutal honesty of her assessment left the command center in uncomfortable silence. However, she continued, I can explain that you're not very good at being threatening, and that you're probably more scared of their parents than they need to be of you. Bounce had discovered that the trap's control panels made interesting sounds when manipulated properly. She was apparently composing music, while Glow provided visual accompaniment through synchronized color changes. 3 minutes to contact, Vale announced. Energy signatures are increasing. I think they know their cubs are here. Of course they know, Winters said reasonably. Kryllian parents maintain psychic connections with their children across considerable distances. These little ones have been broadcasting emotional updates this entire time. Emotional updates? Dr. Ming asked, with sudden scientific interest. Happiness, contentment, excitement about making a new friend. Winters explained, while helping zip down from an improvised climbing structure. If the parents were genuinely worried about danger, they would have arrived much sooner. The implication struck the command center like a revelation. The approaching Kryllian adults weren't responding to a distress signal. They were coming home to collect children who had been telling them about their wonderful day with a new friend. 2 minutes to contact, Vale reported, though his voice had lost some of its panic. Correction. They're not maintaining combat approach vectors. They're decelerating? On the asteroid, all 6 cubs had suddenly perked up with obvious excitement. Their fur shifted to bright, welcoming colors while they made happy chirping sounds and began bouncing around the chamber with infectious enthusiasm. Family's home, Winters announced with satisfaction. Time for proper introductions. Captain, Thorne called urgently. We need you to explain our presence here. These are delicate diplomatic circumstances. General, with respect, diplomatic circumstances become significantly less delicate when you stop pointing weapons at people's children, Winters replied. I suggest you power down all military systems and prepare to apologize for the misunderstanding. Apologize? Pike repeated weakly. You built a trap in their nursery, Winters pointed out. Apologies are definitely appropriate. The facility's structural sensors detected the arrival of massive life forms moving through the asteroid's tunnel systems with purpose, but not urgency. The Kryllian adults had arrived, and they were taking their time to assess the situation before making contact. Storm had appointed herself as the welcoming committee, positioning herself near the chamber's entrance while her fur displayed confident, happy patterns that suggested she was eager to show off their new friend to the returning adults. Massive contacts have entered the facility, Vale reported. But they're not moving aggressively. They appear to be cautious? Caning reported. The first Kryllian adult to enter the chamber was a magnificent creature whose presence filled the space with natural authority. Standing nearly 4 meters tall, covered in deep blue fur that shifted through protective patterns, she moved with the fluid grace of an apex predator, who was currently in full parental assessment mode. The cubs immediately rushed to greet her with enthusiastic displays of affection and rapid-fire color communication that painted the chamber in rainbow patterns of family reunion. "Hello there," Captain Winters said respectfully, standing slowly with her hands visible and her posture indicating peaceful intentions. "You have absolutely beautiful children. They've been wonderful company." The adult Kryllian regarded the human with intelligent golden eyes that missed nothing. Her assessment took approximately 3 seconds, during which she evaluated threat levels, emotional states, and the obvious affection her cubs were displaying toward this strange bipedal creature. Then, she did something that made every military observer question their understanding of apex predator behavior. She sat down, reducing her intimidating height to merely impressive, and made a soft inquiry sound directed at Winters. "Oh, they're fine," Winters replied as if she understood perfectly. "A little hungry. Slightly bored. But very well behaved. We've been telling stories and making music with the equipment that some confused adults left behind." The second adult arrived with equally cautious grace, immediately focusing on the disabled military hardware scattered throughout the chamber. His fur shifted to questioning patterns as he examined the energy barrier generators that his cubs had been using as playground equipment. "Yes, that was a trap," Winters confirmed, following his attention. "Not a very good one, obviously. Your children figured out how to turn it into entertainment systems before anyone got hurt." The adult male approached one of the disabled generators and made a series of sounds that carried unmistakable tones of disapproval. "I know, right?" Winters agreed. Military types never consider the practical implications of their technology. Who builds elaborate containment systems in someone else's home without asking permission first? "Captain Winters," Thorne called through the communication array, his voice carefully controlled. "Perhaps you could facilitate formal introductions?" "Of course," Winters replied. "These are Zip, Bounce, Glow, Whisper, Storm, and Peak, who are justifiably annoyed that military personnel have been playing with dangerous technology in their children's temporary home." The adult female turned her attention toward the communication array and made a sound that needed no translation. It was the universal expression of a parent demanding to know why strangers had been unsupervised around her children. "General Thorne, Hegemony Military," came the response through the speakers. We were conducting a diplomatic operation that encountered unexpected complications." "Diplomatic operation," Winters repeated with obvious amusement. "That's certainly one way to describe building a trap to kidnap someone." The adult male's fur shifted to what could only be described as sardonic patterns, as he apparently shared his mate's opinion of military diplomatic techniques. "We apologize for the intrusion," Thorne continued with the careful formality of someone who had suddenly realized that his career depended on not offending apex predator parents. "The operation was poorly planned and inappropriately executed." The female made another inquiry sound, this one directed at Winters. "He wants to know if you're in any danger from them," Winters translated. "I'm explaining that you're mostly just embarrassed and probably reconsidering your tactical approach to human psychology." Glow had climbed onto his mother's back and was providing a detailed, color narrative of the day's events, apparently describing the wonderful new friend who told stories and shared food and made the boring adult technology into fun games. "Your cubs are excellent judges of character." Winters continued her conversation with the adults. They recognized immediately that the trap wasn't actually dangerous, just poorly thought out. The male approached the communication array and made a series of complex vocalizations that carried formal tones. "He's offering to provide consultation on future diplomatic initiatives," Winters translated with barely concealed laughter. Apparently, Kryllian approaches to problem-solving don't typically involve elaborate deception and containment technology. "We would be honored to receive such consultation," Thorne replied with diplomatic desperation. "He's also pointing out that humans appear to have better instincts for child safety than trained military personnel," Winters added. which is probably something you should consider when planning future operations involving civilian populations. Dr. Ming was frantically taking notes while observing the most successful interspecies diplomatic exchange, in recorded history, conducted entirely through color changes, emotional tone interpretation, and one human, who apparently spoke universal parent. "The Cubs want to show you something," Winters announced, watching as all 6 juveniles began coordinating their color displays into a synchronized pattern. What followed was a light show that transformed the chamber into a living artwork. The Cubs had apparently spent their day composing a collaborative color symphony that told the story of their adventure with the human visitor. Patterns flowed and shifted, creating narrative sequences that depicted confusion, becoming understanding, fear transforming into friendship, and elaborate adult complications being resolved through simple kindness. "That," Dr. Ming breathed over the communication array, "is the most sophisticated artistic expression we've ever documented from any species." "They're children," Winters replied gently. "Children create art naturally when they're happy and safe, and have interesting experiences to share." The adult Kryllians watched their cubs' performance with obvious pride and affection, occasionally adding their own color commentary to emphasize particularly impressive artistic flourishes. When the presentation ended, the female approached Winters and made a formal-sounding vocalization while her mate added harmonious tones. "They're inviting you to visit their home system," Winters translated, her voice carrying obvious emotion. "They want their extended family to meet the human who taught their children that strangers can become friends. And they're suggesting," she continued with growing amusement, "that your military might benefit from similar educational experiences. Apparently, then, they know several other families with patient children who could provide lessons in proper social interaction." The chamber fell silent, except for the soft humming of powered-down military equipment and the contented sounds of a family reunited after a successful adventure. "General," Captain Winters called out cheerfully, "I believe your diplomatic operation was more successful than you planned. You've just been invited to participate in the galaxy's first interspecies childcare exchange program." "Childcare exchange program?" Thorne repeated weakly. "Educational initiative," Winters corrected. "Teaching military personnel how to interact with civilian populations, without accidentally creating international incidents." The cubs had arranged themselves around their parents and their new human friend, creating a peaceful tableau that would probably be studied by xenobiologists for centuries as an example of successful first contact through accidental babysitting. "So," Winters continued, "who wants to learn proper playground etiquette from apex predator toddlers? And that's how the Hegemony Military learned that the most effective traps are the ones you don't build. The best diplomatic strategies involve admitting when you're wrong, and sometimes the greatest military victories come from surrendering to 6 furry children who just want to make friends with everyone they meet." The galaxy, as humans had a habit of proving, was full of family waiting to be discovered by anyone brave enough to treat strangers like people, instead of problems to be solved.